number 296, quickly approaching 300. I've got to choose a good one for 300. Let's get right into this. A Quiet Place, lame one. I mean, day one. Oops, Freudian slip. Okay, before we get into the movie review, we should definitely talk about the limited edition popcorn bucket. That is, oh, I'm sorry, popcorn vessel, as they want to call it for this one. Look, the Dune one, wildly successful. The Deadpool one looks like it's going to be amazing. I am on board for limited edition popcorn buckets, and I feel like this popcorn vessel is just a half ass attempt to get a little bit extra money from us, which, in all honesty, is perfect for this movie because this movie is a half ass attempt hiding behind A Quiet Place's name to get a little bit more money from us. So, I'm thinking about altering the movie spreadsheet to add a specialty category where if you are going to produce a limited edition popcorn bucket, it will factor into the rating. So if it's good, it'll help you a little bit. And if it's bad, it'll hurt you. So obviously, pass on this popcorn bucket, $24 for just a reminder of how bad this movie is. Not trying to spoil anything. It sucks. But let's get to the review now. Before we get into the actual review, having already reviewed the terrible popcorn bucket, 0 out of 10, I think what we need to look at is just the order in which these movies takes place. And the bigger issue is why this movie was even made. So, one, A Quiet Place, the first movie, is about a family navigating life in this post-apocalyptic alien world in which we do see some early scenes or flashbacks of early alien invasion. A Quiet Place Part 2 is the journey of that family continuing, and then you also meet some new characters. I think if we were then going to do A Quiet Place Part 3, which we have done, I think it would make more sense to continue that story. However, what they have done in this movie is go to the very beginning and focus on characters that are not in A Quiet Place or A Quiet Place Part 2. There is one character who's in a few scenes who is in A Quiet Place Part 2 that is also in A Quiet Place Day 1. Without further ado, let's start the movie review. Am I speaking in rhyme? Okay. Anyways, I think this movie suffers a tiny bit from what I like to call the Godfather effect, which is if you make a movie in the Godfather trilogy or series, it's only going to be compared to other movies. And if those other movies are phenomenal, then it has to be phenomenal because it's only going to be compared to other phenomenal movies. Quiet Place Part 1, again, phenomenal. A Quiet Place Part 2, again, phenomenal. A Quiet Place Day 1, not. And that gap is so severe that it makes the movie seem even worse than it actually is. And it actually is very bad. So, entertainment, 2.5 out of 10. This movie sucks. It's really boring. In an hour and 39-minute movie, I was checking my phone all the time to see how much time was left. Entertainment-wise, it's not there. The only person that I care about in this movie isn't even a person, it's a cat. I couldn't care less who dies so long as the cat survives. Okay, category 2, accomplishment of goal, 3.5 out of 10. I am really scared about this movie, not from the actual movie itself, because although it was a horror, it was not scary. And they use the same type of scenes that they used in the first two movies, even though the director was different. My concern for this movie is that it doesn't make sense to end A Quiet Place franchise with this movie. Again, then does this movie set up A Quiet Place Part 4, which they're going to call Who Knows What, that shows how they get, or how that one character gets from A Quiet Place Day 1 in New York City to A Quiet Place Part 2, The Island. I think it makes sense that they do that. Hopefully John Krasinski takes it back over and can direct it. Otherwise, this movie is just going to sit there as a movie they should have never made in what was a really phenomenal 1-2 punch of A Quiet Place Part 1 and A Quiet Place Part 2. Ending, 1 out of 10. It's predictable. You know what's going to happen. You know how it's going to play out. You know who's going to have to make essentially the very familiar Quiet Place sacrifice, as I will call it. You just know what's going to happen. And it doesn't even do that well. Think about A Quiet Place Part 1, not going to spoil it, the way that it ends. Oh, amazing. And you're like, wow, that was intense. That was phenomenal. And A Quiet Place Day 1 doesn't even do that. I'll explain more in the second part of this video. My bigger concern with this ending is because of the way that it ends. I think it sets up that fourth movie, which is going to fall between Day 1 and Part 1, but really go between Day 1 and Part 2, which I just feel is so lazy. Movies need to be freestanding. If they connect, fantastic, but each individual movie has to be good and endings have to be good. And this ending was just not. 1 out of 10. Okay, length. Hour and 39 minutes. What's not to like about that? I think that you could still make that shorter. I think if we spent less time developing the main character in the way that we develop her, in the sense of like, you are not supposed to like her initially. I think if we could get rid of that a little bit and we can cut down that 10 to 15 minutes, that length would be, again, a little bit more palatable, but still 8.5 out of 10 here. It's short, thankfully, because the movie is boring. Finally, overall score for this movie, 2.75 out of 10. This is a huge drop off from A Quiet Place Part 2 on my movie spreadsheet. This is going to put A Quiet Place Day 1, aka Lame 1, 263 out of 296. This is a hard pass. You do not need to see this. And I would definitely say, if you're going to watch the Quiet Place movies, do not watch this one first. Watch them in order that they were released. Watch A Quiet Place Part 2, and then you can watch this one if you want to. I would not watch this movie.
Okay, what you've been waiting for. Let's talk about A Quiet Place Day 1 and why it ended up as number 266 with a 2.75 review. Overall score. Number 1. The biggest issue is that it's not directed by John Krasinski. Like 1 and 2 are fantastic. They're both directed by him. They have a vision. They have a style. This breaks with that style. If you're going to do a third, and Emily Blunt, I think, said in an interview that it was always intended to be a trilogy, but they wanted to see how the second one did before they made it, then why not go back to him? Why use the director from Pig, which was great, but I'm not even sure it was great because, Nick Cage was in it, so was it just okay? And surprisingly, it was okay because Nick Cage shows a movie that was okay and not terrible. I don't know. Anyways, number 2. There's no point in this movie. If this movie had been a continuation of the story, I already spoke about that. If this would continued from where they left off in 2, great. It doesn't. All this does is set up, I think, a fourth movie showing them how they went from the boat in the harbor or river, whatever it was, to the island. 3. I only care about the cat. I don't think anybody in this movie is particularly likable except for the cat. She has cancer. She's going to die. And then you're introduced to this guy who's having these mentee bees. The cat is who I want to survive. I'm glad the cat survives and we can move on. Although I was kind of nervous they were going to pull a I Am Legend on us. Then I was like, great, a terrible movie, which has already made me really like this cat and really root for this cat, and they rip it away from us. Anyways, number 4. Did I just watch an alien invasion from a scene in Tomorrow War? Because it sure did feel like that. It sure did feel like in Tomorrow War, which like, top 10 movie for me. I don't know why. It sure did feel like when those aliens were attacking that city in Tomorrow War, it sure did feel like what unfolded in, I would call, the main scene in A Quiet Place, day 1. 5. Scares are all the same. Like, you know exactly how they're going to scare. You know how she is going to have to sacrifice herself by making a bunch of noise, because it's what John Krasinski did in the first movie to save his kids. That's the really only thing that can happen. And that's why I have a huge issue with this movie, is that it's predictable, it follows the same path, and it isn't set up to be able to surprise us. And it doesn't. Also, 6, which I don't list up here, what were the aliens eating that the cat happened to eat? Some kind of weird like nugget that ripped open like a coconut? Uh, Explain that further. So if their hearing is so good in that same scene, and the alien's ear is right next to the human who is on the top of the building next to the cat, and it can hear the ticking on his watch, then it could probably hear the heartbeat that he has, and I would assume devour him. So that's my thoughts. It sucked. I'm glad I'm never going to watch this again. I'm sorry I spent money to watch it. Don't watch it.